What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? After more than 150 conversations with executives from companies like Disney, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, I've learned that sports is a common denominator. Some of our guests' athletic experiences earned them a place in their sports hall of fame, like Chick-fil-A chairman Dan Cathy. Some hung up their cleats after high school, like Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian, while others, like Condoleezza Rice, claim they weren't that great in their sport. But no matter their skill level, they have all told me that being a part of a team taught them leadership lessons that they still use today. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, I'm your host, Don Yeager, here to give you an all-access pass to genuine, authentic, fireside chat-like conversations with today's business icons so that you can create powerful change in your organization. This is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Rohan Chandran. He is the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Guild, an educational benefits company that works with large employers like Target, Chipotle, Hilton, and PepsiCo to upskill their workforces and create career mobility for employees. Rohan's team actually reached out to us because he is a lifelong cricket enthusiast. He was a founding member of a cricket media site called Cricinfo, which was acquired by ESPN, and he still plays the sport recreationally. In fact, his team just won the local league, so his competitive fire is still alive today. Be sure to visit corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes to access my favorite quotes from today's session and a reflection question to get you thinking about applications from today's conversation.
A hungry team pushes to see where the boundaries are. One of my few fears in life is a balloon exploding in my face when I blow it up. What do you do when you operate with that fear and you're not sort of hungry for the biggest possible balloon? You blow it up to about half the possible size. What I'm asking a team and what I'm looking for in a hungry team is that we're willing to blow up those balloons in the workplace so that they explode, because that's the only way you're going to find out how far you actually can go.
Rohan, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Don. Honored to be part of the podcast.
I do know you grew up in Hong Kong, and looking at colleges, when you looked at Stanford, one of the things that was important to you was that they had cricket. Now, you're only our second ever cricket player. Tell me why cricket was so important as a transition for you into higher ed.
Yeah, you've made me realize as you asked that my greatest legacy to the world might be as a trivia answer. Is there anything in the world that only one person has ever done? Chosen Stanford for cricket. I hope somewhere along the line there's one or two more that follow me. Look, cricket was very much my life growing up. My dad played. My mom was the kind of girl who skipped school growing up to watch cricket. So it was in the blood. It was in the family. As a baby, I was on the cricket field watching my dad play every Saturday and Sunday. So there was no way cricket wasn't going to be part of my life. And as someone who's maybe not fundamentally athletic, if you will, I was pretty fortunate to luck into some ability that developed with a ton of practice. I became a competent cricketer. I led the national under-19 team for a few years. I was in the senior national setup, though I was young and a fringe player there. But I also knew that my odds of making it as a professional cricketer were not high. I didn't have the level of discipline and willingness to sacrifice that is involved in making it to that level. But I knew it was my anchor in life. So when it came time to choosing where to go for university, the overwhelming majority of my schoolmates in Hong Kong, the UK was the destination. But I applied to a handful of schools in the US, basically because one or two of my friends were. So I thought, let's see what happens here. And life got complicated because I then got into a few, which was never in the script. So I'm there looking at some pretty solid options, but all of them are in the eastern states or in England. And then you've got this one in California. And for someone who starts to freeze at about 65 degrees Fahrenheit,
I'm with you.
I'm glad to hear there are a few more of us. Stanford was really appealing there. So I did the logical thing. I called up the admissions office to ask, do you guys have a cricket team?
That was the question you asked the admissions office.
That was my question to the Dean of International Admissions. And of course, he didn't know the answer to that because
he'd never been asked.
Not one that he received on a regular basis. So there was a bunch of telephonic back and forth. And eventually they determined that there was an official club sport of cricket. And they put me in touch with someone at the cricket club. So I then got on the phone with that person. People will tell you there's no such thing as a stupid question in life. I'm sure you've heard that 100 times, but I came pretty close. So I asked the chap who was leading the cricket club two things. I said, is the cricket good? And is the team good? And he said, yes, and very good.
That's all you needed?
That's all I needed. So I got that robust assessment from this guy of cricket at Stanford. And I told my parents, I've spent 13 years in the British education system. It is time to take a leap. And it's going to be okay because the cricket's good and it doesn't matter that I'm so far from home and I don't know anyone within 2,500 miles. Probably one of the best decisions of my life. But truth is, I went to the first practice session in September 1992. I went home that evening and I called home in a flood of tears, telling my parents that I'd never seen such a ridiculous excuse for a cricket net, that's like the batting cage equivalent, and that I'd ruined my life, made a huge mistake, and it wasn't worth it.
So by letting him define good for you, you made the mistake of buying in without digging deeper.
There is subjectivity in assessments like good. So as a leader and as an individual, you actually need to provide clarity on what you mean by good because everyone has their own interpretation.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah, it's a constant thing when you do employee engagement surveys or things like that. It's one of the things that commonly comes up in every company I've worked at. We don't have clarity. And you realize that you'll often go into a meeting with 6 or 7 other executives and you'll all agree to something. And then you come back 2 weeks later and find out that you haven't quite all marched in the same direction. And why is that?
You had 6 different levels of agreement.
That's right, because the thing wasn't clearly defined. And this is even more important in this remote first world where you're not sitting in the same room, in the same building, and having those little connections that help you refine every day. People will hear me talk ad nauseum about being clear and precise on the definition and what it is we actually align to. And there's a balance there because you could then spend weeks and weeks trying to define the minutiae of that. And that's not the intent. But if you're going to walk away from a room and do things, being really intentional and clear about what it is you said you're doing and you expect from each other is so critical.
Yeah.
As we're hiring, you often talk about, okay, let's hire someone who raises the bar. How do we improve the average standard of our engineering team or our product management team? Two things that come into play. Everyone has a perspective on what raising the bar means, but it's not necessarily the same perspective. And everyone has their own approach to hiring and how they ask questions and how they specifically look for things. I've lived through this in the past where you'll say, okay, we want to hire a better product manager who's going to raise the average. So we want someone who is really good at translating requirements for engineers or understanding the market inside out. But what does that really mean and how do you look for it? We were recently hiring for a role like that. And as a new leader coming into Guild, I've been at the company 3 or 4 months. I sent out a fairly detailed email talking about very specifically what are the skills, the tasks, the type of questions that we want to ask with each person in the interview process so that we establish that level of good. And the goal of that was to get everyone aligned on what does a good product manager look like. It's not a general, we want better. It's here's a gap we have in the organization. We're not sitting in front of customers and synthesizing input. Let's bring in someone who can show everyone else what that looks like, because part of raising the bar is not just having an individual who raises the bar, but can everyone in a team look to their left and right and see an example of what that looks like? I think that's always the way we learn best. The words are great, the books are great, but seeing it in action makes it real.
Love it. So we learned that cricket played a role in your choosing to become a Cardinal. Tiger Woods and Condoleezza Rice would probably be really proud. But the sport is still a part of your work-life balance. You continue to be active and play and participate. In fact, I understand your team did pretty well this year.
That's right. The core of our team is aged between 45 and 55, and the core of all the opposition in the league we play in are 20 years younger. My team is the Stanford Supernovas, and there's a point to that name. The supernova is kind of the last hurrah of a fading star in the astrophysics world, and that's who we are. So I've been playing with Stanford Cricket Club since 1992. We formed this team in 2017, a bunch of guys who'd played together in the 90s and early 2000s. To qualify, you had to be over 40 or have played for the club for 15 years. So we were really looking to bring the spirit and the camaraderie that we had back then together. And we're very much a ragtag assortment. So we have people in the team who fly around in their private jets, but they have butterfingers. We have folks who managed to get injured while standing still. We had that one happen in the midst of our championship season. I still can't get over the fact that this happened. We've had biceps and calves detach in the course of normal motion. And we're a bunch of engineers, number crunching, Hollywood analysts, C-suite executives, founders. We've got the works in there.
You are legitimately supernovas.
We are legitimately supernovas, or we like to think of ourselves that way. And when we started in 2017, we had 3 goals for the season. One was no serious injuries, and we blew that out in the second game. Second was to have a lot of fun, and we are still doing that today. The third was to win at least one game in that first season. And I still don't quite know how, but we found ourselves in the semifinals that first season. We hit 4 semifinals in 6 years. 1 year was off because of COVID. And then last year we lifted the trophy.
Wow.
There's a great story there. Probably could be a whole podcast in itself. There's no rhyme or reason to this actually happening. And if my teammates listen to this, they're going to lose the plot at the thought that there are lessons to be learned from us, but there really are. Just the importance of gestalt in a team. If you summed up the parts of our team as I just described, you might come up with a negative number, but actually if you multiply negatives, you can get something positive. We know what we are. We communicate effectively with one another. We have each other's backs, and we really understand strengths, playing to them rather than fretting about limitations. And we really create this whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. So you'll often hear advice in the business world that, what are your weaknesses and how do we shore them up and make them stronger? I'm a little contrarian on that one. I like to say, okay, what are your strengths? What are you good at? How do we play to that and allow those to shine? And we'll figure ways to bolster the weaknesses. And it's very easy to get trapped into prevention of failure and figuring out how to avoid things going wrong. It's hard, but infinitely more valuable to do things that might lead to success. We have a bowler on the cricket team who's so tempting that we actually trash talk our own team. We say to him, the batter can't decide whether to hit you for 4 or 6. It'd be like telling your pitcher, it's all good because the batter can't decide whether to hit the home run over left field or right field. We look at that as an opportunity to create some uncertainty in our opponent. And sure, he might get hit out of the park once or twice, but he'll also get a few people out. And we have this completely unlikely champion. And every week teams come up to us and, how is that guy getting people out? It's all about the way we approach it.
What I love about this is immediately, as a leader, I have to assume that you look within your own team and you say, I want to try to figure out how to play to strengths.
Absolutely right. It's about an intentionality in how you set up and structure the team so that you create something in which everyone complements one another. That's complement with an E, although I guess with an I helps as well in the process. Think of it like a talent draft, if you will.
Yep.
Okay, we have these roles that need doing. Who's the person who indexes and spikes with the skill set that's needed for that role? This particular product management role is heavily customer facing. Who's that person who's awesome at getting out and having that conversation and teasing out what's really going on in the market and the mind of the customer? Let's put them there. Let's not worry about the fact that they may not be the greatest at working with an engineer to pull that together. We'll complement that elsewhere in the team so that the whole unit comes together. Org structure is often something teams and organizations fall into by accident, but the point is for us to be very intentional about it. And that means also aligning a team very clearly around the outcomes that matter, not just the tasks that they're doing. For us at Guild, that's outcomes for society, that's outcomes for individual learners, it's outcomes for our employer and learning partners, and it's outcomes for our business and shareholders. We want to set those goals high enough that they feel rational, but stretchy enough that you're not just walking the path by default. I actually often talk about a distinction between leadership and management. Managers take people down a path that is defined and marching them to the end of it. But leaders will take you somewhere that you didn't originally believe was possible. It's a place where you look back and you think, wow. And this goes back to our Supernova story. I mean, we're still pinching ourselves like, wait, did we actually lift that trophy at the end of the season? This could not possibly have happened to this group of people. That first Supernova season, we won our second game and we thought, oh, that was our goal.
We only set out to win one.
That's right. We could have said we've done it. Instead, we said, could we do one more? Oh, we're close to the semifinals. Could we make a push for it? And we got there.
Yeah.
Leicester City winning the English Premier League in 2016. They may never win it again. And that's very much true of Stanford Supernovas as well. But they did it with an assortment of players who were not playing for the big fancy teams, but who collectively created something that was just way beyond what they added up to. They didn't set out targeting winning the Premier League, but they did set a high bar. And crucially, every time they approached that bar, they raised the bar and challenged themselves a little bit more. And that's a great way to operate in the business world. It's exactly what I ask of my teams. We've spent the last 3 months going through a heavy exercise of saying, okay, what are the measures of success here in everything we're doing? Some of them will probably blow out and some of them we may miss. And that's okay. As we blow ones out, we won't say we're done. We'll say, great, let's raise the bar and let's do more. And that cycle breeds a lot of success.
That's awesome. You know, I read a LinkedIn article that you wrote. It's funny, we just recently had an interview with the CEO of EY. We're talking about momentum and how you create it within his organization. He talked about an important strategy session, a moment in which a strategic goal was set that became a real important piece of their future. But you have this great line in this article. You said strategy is one of the most overrated things in an organization because a good strategy with a dysfunctional team in a poor environment means nothing.
A wise person once told me to assume everything I ever wrote or said would be public and held up in a court of law. So be careful, it'll come back. And here we are. I love it. I don't consider myself a master strategist. My belief is that very few people actually are. Survivorship bias means that we see success and then we go back and presume that it's because of some stunning grand plan. And that's rarely the case. So if you take Pep Guardiola, the Manchester City coach right now, a team that, by the way, I don't remotely like as a Manchester United fan, but I'm going to run with the example. If you were to hand his entire playbook to a Sunday league team, the equivalent of the Stanford Supernovas in soccer, they could spend years with that playbook and they would not turn into world beaters just because the strategies and tactics were bang on point. Conversely, if you took Guardiola and his team and handed them the playbook that Sunday league team wrote after a night out at the pub, I'd stake a lot on that team with its leader creating success out of that over the course of a season, because they're imbued with the nature, the camaraderie, the fervent desire, the hunger of a team that combined with fundamental high levels of skill is going to get them there. And my point here is not to say that people shouldn't have a plan or the company should just wing it and see what happens. Not at all. You should have a strategy. You should have a sense of where you're trying to go. But it's always the execution that wins or loses in the end. You hear that a lot in Silicon Valley, that ideas are a dime a dozen. It's who executes that gets there. And that execution for me depends first and foremost on the team that's in place, leadership included. Think about it. You'll often hear about startups and how much pivoting they go through until they find success.
Right.
Therein lies the actual genius, the ability of that team to operate with agility, to recognize what's happening and adjust quickly. And this is why investors invest in founders and teams, because I can see that they understand a space and they've built a team that can take it on. success is typically actually attributable to a strong, unified team with great leaders throughout. While I was at Stanford, we did some amazing things there. I'll go back to my time with Cricinfo, which was a pretty cool thrill to wake up every day and see this is part of ESPN and that cricket pretty much starts and ends with Cricinfo, right? It's not something we imagined. And that's kind of the point, because anyone who tells you, and there probably are some who will, that that happened because of a strategy or a plan we had is at least stretching the truth. Some of our official strategies were probably beyond execrable. We started this in early 1993, and we were using IRC, Internet Relay Chat, to run the organization. IRC is essentially what Slack is today.
Right.
The web, as we know it today, was beyond nascent. And actually, the Mosaic browser, Mark Andreessen's first browser, came out later that year. And we had this internal debate over this whole web browser. And the end result of that debate was the web's a fad and it's not really worth embracing. That's how strategically on point we were. Now, history will never get written that way because no one wants to read the book about the people who weren't prophetic. But there you go. That was the decision, the strategic plan, if you were. But you have a team of students and academics who are just engaged in what they're doing and always tinkering and trying to say, how can we make this better? We poked and prodded and played and threw up a web server, learned how HTTP worked and all of that, pushing each other to try things in the pursuit of how do we get this cricket thing, which was running on Gopher and IRC, to be bigger and better. Once we got on the web, we became one of the great early websites on the internet. And it was mind-blowing stuff, very little to do with a strategy we had in place, almost the opposite of it, and lots to do with a team and leaders in that team. And I think we were all leaders in a very disjointed global team at that point who just stayed alive to what was going on and said, we're going to keep poking and adjusting and not be locked into some written document or plan that was laid out and defined our course.
How great must that have felt to have ESPN reach out to you all? I mean, that had to be a mind blow to think you're just building this thing and then suddenly the worldwide leader.
I wake up every day mind blown that that legacy is a thing. Not one of us, if we're telling the truth, ever thought anything like this was possible.
Yeah. You know, many of us in sports, we believe we can watch momentum occur in the middle of a contest. Sometimes momentum starts working against you as well. If you could think through from a business perspective, has there ever been a similar example for you in the world of business that you might think of or remember?
The way we accidentally embraced the web, it wasn't us doing it, but it was what we did on the back of it that actually created the moment. What we saw was, oh, people are actually embracing this. We didn't just sit back and say, let's see what happens here. We doubled down on that and said, okay, let's redesign how this thing is. We don't know how this is going to work, but we're going to go at it hard and play that game. So, momentum is mass times velocity. You can't easily adjust the mass or heft of your business in an instant, but that speed is under your control. So when you see that mass moving in the direction that you want, put your foot down on the accelerator and say, let me double down. And what we did at Cricinfo was great. This web thing seems to be a thing, contrary to what we thought previously. Let's go after it. And we experimented and we put visuals into it and what used to be a text-based site. And we restructured the way things worked and the way things were linked. We just went at it hard with that sense that there was something here and we could create momentum. We took the feedback from customers who said, yeah, I love this. And it was great. We'll double down on that. We have a website. We can put a live scorecard up. And we were the first live sports on the internet. And we created a Java applet that had 30 frames a second of still video. And that was the first live video of any sport on the internet in 1996. And it was just us saying, we're going to go hard at this and everything may not work, but we created momentum. And I've enjoyed it both on the sports field and in business. But I do think it's not as simple as confidence and belief just builds and you have this magical snowball effect. That snowball effect is real. And as the snowball gets bigger, it starts to get kind of invincible and it can bust through obstacles with ease. But my sort of more nuanced consideration of that is that it's not just this wave that you ride. There's always a trigger, a moment, if you will.
A spark.
That's right, a spark. But to create that momentum, there has to be some intentionality around, I'm going to leverage that trigger and do something to make it bigger.
You have to prepare for the spark. You have to be ready for it.
That's exactly right. So on the cricket field, you might be waiting all day to take a wicket and you've got two batters out there, it's a 5-day game and they've been going for 6 hours. What's going to happen here? And then a moment happens because one of the batters is a little tired and there's an unforced error, if you will. That's not really cricket speak, but it'll work. That moment doesn't create the momentum. What creates momentum is the decisions you make there. A door has been opened, but do you do something about it? And the best leaders in the sports field will react quickly and nimbly to seeing, oh, there was a spark. How do I latch onto it? Can I take advantage of that situation? My strategy shifts. And in cricket, you'll see the best leaders, something like that happens. The field setting changes. Your strike bowler comes back on and you say, can I now create momentum? And I'll contrast this with Yahoo a little bit, where we probably dulled momentum out of fear of what might go wrong because you're a $6 billion revenue company. But we had a team at Yahoo called the Paranoids, a great bunch of people, and they really were good. And it made sense on one level. But you think about it, we had a team of people whose job it was to be paranoid about what might go wrong.
Wow.
You see a spark, and instead of doubling down on that spark and saying, how do we go fast at it? We said, hang on a second, let's make sure we don't risk revenue going after it.
Yeah, we could get burned by that spark.
That's right. So my point here is there is a thing, but it is an intentional thing that you have to participate in creating, not just sit back and hope it happens.
Wow. Rohan, I've asked this question dozens of times, maybe the best answer I've ever received. Thank you for that, because I'm fascinated by it. In fact, even writing a book on the concept of momentum and the science of it.
Oh, fabulous. I look forward to reading that one.
That'd be great. So people often talk about trying to avoid stress. Everybody says, I want a stress-free life, but you actually have quite the contrarian view. You actually welcome the appearance of stress in your life.
All right. The words keep catching up with you. I'm not saying that I'm eagerly seeking out ways to be stressed, but my thesis is very much that the existence of stress, of some fear or nerves or the worry about will something go well, that to me is an indication that something is fundamentally meaningful and important. It's when I get out of bed and turn off that alarm clock instead of hitting snooze, it's because something matters. You want to go out there and play a game when there's something on the line. There's a different motivation and drive. And anyone who's played sport will be able to identify those moments when you just feel that little extra edge. And it's because you know the opponent is strong. You're not just going to win by default. You're going to have to do something about it. And if something matters to you, it should momentarily present some stress or tension because you should be concerned about how it goes. Great, because that's what I've been setting up for. I want that challenge. I want that difficulty. I'm thrilled to be here for that. And I feel this on the cricket field, especially now that I'm old, but at any time, if I'm bowling to a really good batter or if I'm facing someone who's really quick, these are the moments you relish because those are the moments where I'm going to find out, have I really got it?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't win those moments, but there's no excitement or value if you're not playing for that. And I feel the same thing in the workplace. You'll see my career arc is less about joining the rocket ship that's already set to go to the moon. It was going to the moon whether or not I joined. Those are great rides, don't get me wrong. They're phenomenal rides. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to the moon? But there's something extra thrilling about joining that rocket ship that's on the launch pad. And this is how I classify Guild. We are a rocket ship, but we're on the launch pad and we could go to the moon, we could go to Mars, we could go beyond our solar system. It's on my plate every morning to wake up and make decisions that fuel this correctly, because if I get it wrong, we blow up the rocket ship while it's on the launch pad. Sorry, that's a terrible analogy. I should find something more positive.
Yeah, terrible analogy. But I will tell you that one of my favorite quotes in all of sports ever actually adorns the players' locker room in the U.S. Open tennis tournament from Billie Jean King. She said, "Pressure is a privilege."
Love it.
The honor you get for being in a moment that's big.
That's right. I feel blessed and fortunate to be there.
Yeah. I also know you're a student of leadership. In fact, you have a goal of reading 50 books a year. As an author, I thank you. And you not only learn by playing sports, but also by watching them. that you enjoy learning from successful coaches and managers. You're always trying to study them, see how you can use maybe some of what you're learning into your leadership journey. Can you share an example?
Absolutely. I have some amount of bias here, but Sir Alex Ferguson.
I knew Man U was coming up here.
There you go. And look, given that the Stanford of the East signed him and Michael Moritz to teach leadership, there must be some merit there. Sorry, I had to throw that dig in. It's really how he approached team building over his 26 years in charge. There's a sheer mindedness about him and what he tried to foster in his teams. And that spoke to just not accepting anything less than the best. It was we are going to do this. We are here to win. And every time Manchester United set foot out on the field, it is with an intent to win. There's no, a nice draw would be okay against this team. There is only one outcome that is good enough. It's a little bit like going to the Olympics. What do? You go there for the gold medal. It doesn't matter if you're running against Usain Bolt. You're going there for gold. You don't set yourself up for, hey, a bronze or silver would be nice. You may reflect after the fact and say, okay, look, Usain Bolt's pretty good at this running thing, and I can be happy with the silver, but you're striving for that every day. And it's something I try to instill in myself and the teams I'm in or leading, that let's not ever allow the bar to go a little lower. And I go back to my time at Yahoo. I mean, Yahoo had everything. Google plus Meta combined is what Yahoo could and should have been. And we had the talent, the data, and everything to go there. And I was there right at the time when Google overtook Yahoo in revenue. So I saw that inflection point, and there was too much satisfaction in my mind with making $1.5 billion every quarter. And I heard phrases like, being second in this market overall is not a bad thing.
Wow.
That is not the mindset that leads to winning. And sure enough, Yahoo's still around today, and I bleed purple a little bit. And it's amazing that it's still around, but it's an afterthought, and that's a reality. Sir Alex, his ruthlessness and his ability and willingness to determine that even the greatest of players at some point was no longer right for the team. And he did it with folks like Roy Keane and Ruud van Nistelrooy, who were all-time greats. He was comfortable with accepting that, okay, here's where I need to take the team. And just because someone was a star yesterday, it doesn't mean they have an infinite runway in terms of how I'm making this team great for the next cycle. You often look at a winning team and say, well, we won the championship with Supernovas last year. Let's do exactly the same thing again. That's exactly when you need to inject a little bit more hunger into the team and keep them going. And he almost to a fault and pointedly, every time the team won, said, I'm going to shake things up a little bit. And you'd look from the outside and say, why? You couldn't have had a better year in 1999 with a treble, but he still shook things up. And it really ensures that there's that hunger. Hunger comes in a couple of ways. It's what you instill in the way the team operates inside, but taking the Alex Ferguson lesson for me, it is continuously refreshing the team. Sometimes what happens is we refresh a team by saying, oh, let's bring in a new leader for this division and everything's going to change. It doesn't work as simply as that. If you're really trying to refresh and create another level of hunger, you need that example at all levels of the organization, and you need a little bit of fresh blood that tells people, and this is what Alex Ferguson used to say about it, I want my players on their toes. I want my players not to feel threatened and unvalued, but to feel like they've got to bring their best every day in order to be part of the first 11 and get out on that field. Because that hungry team is a proactive team, taking ownership. They're not waiting for permission. They're not asking before they put their left foot in front of the right in order to take a step forward. And over time, you get comfortable with a way of operating, and you need to inject something to freshen that up. A hungry team is pushing to see where the boundaries are. I've got 2 teenagers now, so I don't do this so much. But one of my few fears in life is a balloon exploding in my face when I blow it up. So I have this visual of a frame-by-frame shot of a balloon being blown up, and there's that moment when it bursts and explodes in the person's face. What do you do when you operate with that fear and you're not sort of hungry for the biggest possible balloon? You blow it up to about half the possible size. What I'm asking a team and what I'm looking for in a hungry team is that we're willing to blow up those balloons in the workplace so that they explode, because that's the only way you're going to find out how far you actually can go.
How do you push that last breath?
It's a comfort with the failure that's involved in that balloon exploding. Like I said, I'm scared of that thing exploding on my face. And it's getting comfortable with that fear that, in my experience, has been the hurdle for people. The intellectual thing is actually not as hard as you might think. People do want to do their best and be their best, but they hold themselves back from giving that because it's what might go wrong. And if you talk to your teams at Guild, I'm in the process of doing a one-on-one with all 400 people in my organization, one by one. And this applies to every company I've worked at. They'll tell you there's a little fear. If I do that extra thing, will I lose my job? Will I get told off for it? Create an environment that encourages it. And I did this once years ago. It was in a smaller organization. We had a Courage to Fail award.
You gave out an award for failure.
2 awards. We had a Great Winner Superstar of the Week award and a Courage to Fail award. For the Superstar Award, you had to be peer nominated. So you can put your own hand up and say, hey, I did this amazing thing. Someone else had to say it. But for the Courage to Fail Award, you had to put your own hand up and say, here's the thing I was trying to do. And it took guts to do it. We gave an award and we gave them a stuffed lion that they could hold on their desk. The first couple of weeks, there were nominations for the Superstar Award left, right, and center, and no one wanted to put their hand up for the other one. 2 months later, all everyone wanted was that stuffed lion on their desk, and it became a badge of pride. We weren't trying to encourage failure versus the courage to try things and blow up that balloon further. And it was transformative because all of a sudden, the team started taking those risks. And it seems trite and silly. You can say they were doing it because of a stuffed lion that we bought off Amazon. But it's little things like that. It's not always some dramatic, massive reorganization that creates it. Sometimes it's just a little injection to make it okay that allows people to go there.
The visual in its own is perfect. And I can see how once the comfort zone is created, people start to realize I actually might be celebrated for the fact that I tried to stretch.
That's right.
I took that last breath and added it to the balloon.
That's exactly right.
I love it. You know, many people, especially in the world of business, use the word teams incorrectly. They talk about their team when the truth is they aren't really a team as you and I might appreciate or understand. As someone who's built teams, participated in them, if you were coaching me and I'm handed a group of individuals and I'm trying to coalesce them, trying to build them together, make them a team, what are some things I should do to help that group of people cross the bridge and become a team?
That's a great question. You're right. People use the word very loosely and blithely. I'll tell you the one thing that doesn't make a group of people into a team, and that is standing up on stage and asserting loudly that there's no I in team and one team, one dream. And all those slogans are great, don't get me wrong. But too often I see this sense of, I just have to say that and people will run away and do it. The number one thing creating sort of that cohesive unit that you want is context. If you can set context repeatedly and clearly, you get there. Some people can be very rooted in the metrics when you're talking about context. And I'm one of those people who's very fundamentally metrics driven, but there's a bigger picture that's important. If you and I are playing sport and my score is 40 and yours is 30, who's winning? Well, if the context is that we're playing tennis at the US Open, then I've got the edge and I know I can use that to determine how to play the next point. I just need to hold safe on that point and I win. But if the context is we're playing golf at the Masters, I've got 40 and you've got 30. Things are very different. I'm in trouble. You can choose to play safe, but I have to take egregious risks to somehow try and win. So creating that clarity with repetition and reinforcement for the team of what we're actually trying to do is important. My personal leadership coach, Gordon, uses an example, which I love. You can have a team of bricklayers and window framers and painters and masons, and they're all doing a job and you say we're a team. Or you can say we're a collective that's building a cathedral. All of a sudden, the job of that bricklayer is something completely different and the context has shifted. And that's huge in turning that collection of people doing a set of tasks into a team that's unified around an objective. So that clarity in the workplace And setting that clarity not at the start of every year in one town hall and saying, hey guys, this is what it is. It is a continued repetition of that. I take a lot of lessons from sport. I also take a lot of lessons in life from parenting. And it's like when your children are young, sorry, this may be offensive to everyone who's worked in my teams now. You repeat the message so that they grok what it is. And we're all like that as human beings. If you hear it once, it doesn't resonate the same way as when it's reinforced and you realize this is really what we're doing and we're all in it together. And there are tools like OKRs that are a classic way of ensuring that that context trickles down and everyone sees their part in it. I have no dogma about a specific framework. The point is that you establish a mechanism by means of which everyone knows their place. Other couple of things are creating leaders throughout the team. So I often use the quote, I believe it's Gandhi, but I'm not sure. Leaders are measured not by the followers they have, but by the leaders they create. We talked before about the Alex Ferguson example, a team filled with leaders, Roy Keane, Gary Neville, Peter Schmeichel. Everywhere you look to your left and right, you see people who are setting the example, who are raising the bar. That's what gets us thinking, oh, we're all in this. I need to be a part of that. And it gets those juices flowing to say, how do I step up and be like this other person? Tie this with designing and structuring your team with intentionality. I'm a big fan of zero-based thinking when you do this. It's hard to do in an organization, but if you have an empty slate and clear goals in mind and work through what the team you actually need to make that happen looks like, no names, just a structure or setup, and then you do the talent draft that we were talking about earlier, you start to set things up for where you want to go rather than where they happen to have been. I can take Manchester United again this season, and they're an example of messing that up completely this year. You started the season with 4 left backs, sent one of them out on loan, watched 2 of them get injured, and then bizarrely sent the 4th one back to his parent club. And the 2 who were injured got re-injured. And now you've got a team playing the second half of the season with no left backs.
Right.
Left back is a critical role in driving success. And now you look to left back and there's no person there able to provide. The whole team breaks apart. If you have that clarity and you want a team to function, the team has to operate interdependent on one another. And that's critical for a team. It's not me thinking I'll make it happen. It's me knowing I have a role. And if everyone performs their role, this gestalt happens.
Wow. Now I understand all the problems of Manchester United.
There you go.
Rohan, I cannot thank you enough for the opportunity to learn about Guild, learn more about cricket. But beyond that, I appreciate you joining us to be a corporate competitor.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure, Don, and I just really enjoyed that discussion.
I will look forward to being one of your 50 books next year.
Done deal.
Man, there are so many nuggets here. His answer to the momentum question, which I love to ask, as you know, if you've listened to this podcast, was the greatest ever. That idea that he was talking about contrasting his time at Yahoo. They had a group of people there who didn't want to mess things up, constantly squashing sparks instead of jumping on them because they were generating $6 billion a year. They didn't want to mess up the goodness that was there. Contrasting that against the little website, the little Cricinfo work that he started while in college that grew into something that ESPN purchased and set all kinds of bars for online sporting coverage. A wonderful, powerful example of how to build momentum and how we can learn from that. I also loved his story about calling Stanford and asking if their cricket team was any good. Obviously being told, yes, we're good. It wasn't in fact good. He had asked the wrong question. He had left too much ambiguity there. And without clarity, he had been led to come to Stanford and enjoy a cricket team that wasn't that good. Being clear on subjective questions like that as leaders is important. He doesn't ask at Guild, how do we hire new people to raise the bar? He actually defines what it means to raise the bar. And then finally, totally smitten by his Courage to Fail award. You had to put your own hand up in order to be the one to win that little stuffed lion. But the Superstar Award, which is one that you would receive for doing something great, had to be peer nominated. It set a standard by saying, I raised my hand, I tried something, it didn't work. Failing was okay as long as it's done in the right way. Fascinating learning experience and a great one that we can apply into our own businesses. I'll be better as a leader as a result of this conversation, and I hope you will be as well. I appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Feedback helps us spread the insights of our guests to a wider audience. It actually increases our ratings. Thank you so much for those who have done so in the past. And catch new episodes every Wednesday. Subscribe at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to be the first to get a chance to listen. And as a thank you gift, I will send you a chapter from one of my best-selling books. Stay connected with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. My handle is @DonYaeger, DonYaeger. And until next week, I appreciate you.